Vinnie Adams. The following is an interview with Phoenix, Brandon, another Brandon, Jeff, and Grant. They were all stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base around the early 2000s at the time of multiple UFO UAP incidents, including the Red Square UFO from 2003. Although none of them were direct witnesses to the Red Square UFO, few of them were involved in the incident as security forces, and they also had their own sightings of different UAP during their time on base. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. It's going to be great to sort of hear your individual accounts about what you all witnessed or heard about at Vandenberg. So I'd like to go around each person individually and get your name, your position, or anything like that, the reason why you were at Vandenberg, any duties, just to give an overview of your role. And then we can go into kind of what you saw. So, Phoenix, if you don't mind kicking us off, that would be great. Thank you.
Of course. My name is Phoenix. I was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base from 2002 to 2008. I was a security forces member, and I worked the security side.
And so, if you could just sort of tell us about your location and when it was that you had a sighting, if you don't mind.
Okay. My sighting happened on base in base housing. And Vandenberg's located in California on the coast.
Okay. And so give us when was this? What year was this? Do you remember?
About 2005.
Okay. If you could kind of give us some details about like where you were, what was occurring, and just sort of lay it all out for us. Thank you.
Okay. We had just had, we were at Jeff's house. We had a barbecue and things were winding down. There were just the three of us left, Brandon, Jeff, and myself. We were hanging out in the backyard, just talking. It's pretty late, probably between 1 or 2 in the morning. And we worked on B flight, which was mid shift. So we're used to keeping that schedule and just being up all night. So that wasn't uncommon. And so we're just sitting in the backyard talking. And I'm sitting across from Jeff, and Brandon's on my right. And we're talking, and off in the distance, is when I saw the object coming towards us.
And was this a solid object? Could you see the structure? Or what did it actually look like?
Oh, that's like not that none of this is weird or all of it, but that's like the weird thing. Like we couldn't make out what the object looked like. It had a light on it, and we could make out the light, and it was a pulsating light. It would get really bright and then slowly dim out and then disappear, and then get really bright and slowly dim out again and disappear. And because of that, like we could track it. It wasn't moving fast. It was moving slow, and it was coming towards us. And so we're talking, and then I see it coming, and the guys realize I have stopped talking. They're like, what's wrong? Are you okay? And I'm like, are you guys like seeing this? And Jeff turns around and he's like, what the fuck is that? And so we like stand up and we go over, and it comes right towards us. And we were able to track it through his backyard and then watch it go off in the distance.
And did it go off in the same sort of slow speed, or did it change speed at all?
No. So we were assuming underneath it. Like I said, we couldn't hear it, or we couldn't see it. But tracking for as long as we did, we assumed that we were under it when we were going in the backyard. So it crossed the backyard, and then the light came back on, and it started to go right, and the light was on, and then it whoosh, just darted off really fast and then disappeared. Like I said, we couldn't hear it. We assumed that we would be able to hear it because just the way the light was, it seemed like it was low, not super high or anything.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that you guys, excuse me, are probably used to seeing like military aircraft, planes, helicopters. So in theory, you would have recognized it by sound or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why at first, like I was like, oh, they're running night operations. I was like, wait a second, like why would, like if it's a spotlight, why is it like, it just didn't make sense. At first you're like, oh yeah, the helicopter. I'm like, well, wait a second, no, not a helicopter. And then like missiles and stuff. So we're used to seeing things up in the sky that we could be like, oh, that's what that is. It's satellite or helicopter.
And did you consider reporting it, that there was this thing had come over base?
Yes, absolutely. Jeff called the desk, which is like our dispatch center, and told them what we saw. And then they called the helicopter squadron to see if they were running night operations, because they're supposed to notify the desk if they're doing that. And then we got a call back saying that they have no idea what we were talking about. Everything was grounded. Nothing should have been up in the air.
Wow. And I assume that these things may be captured on some kind of radar system that can see things over base. Am I right? Is that something that there should be some data somewhere?
I would assume.
But I guess that's locked away somewhere, maybe.
I'm sure. I mean, I wish it was when we had like now you have phones and you can track it and things like that. But back then they didn't have the technology for that.
Right.
It was really interesting, but no, couldn't make out what it looked like or anything like that. Just this pulsing light that was with it. And again, no sound. It was really interesting.
Yeah. So was it more just a kind of confusion at the time rather than excitement? Because I know from speaking to a lot of UFO witnesses, there's a multitude of feelings that people go through. So how did you really feel when you were seeing this thing?
We were just we're trying to figure out what it was. Like, so we're cops. We're trained to report the facts, what we see.
Yeah. Not
embellish. Not I'm not trying to sway anyone or anything like that. Just this is what it was. So we're just trying to figure out. Okay, well, if it wasn't a helicopter, like what's going on?
Yeah. And did you speak to people on base following that? Over the coming days, was it something you talked about openly, or was it more, I want to keep this quiet, just for maybe fear of ridicule or anything like that?
Not on my end. I didn't really talk to anyone about it, just not because I was afraid of being ridiculed, just because I don't know, nobody seemed to know what it was. So then kind of, what's the point, I guess?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of disbelief.
Yeah.
They see this and you second guess everything. Like, I didn't really see what I thought I saw. I didn't really see this. And honestly, what's interesting about kind of our group of friends is that, I think I mentioned it to Porter. We probably mentioned it to Grant, and then this other guy, Chaz, that we know, who was part of the Vandenberg Square incident too. And so I think we had a very tight, small group of friends that we had talked to. And so I think in that group, we had talked about it. But again, it's just like, really? Is that what you saw? Like, for real? Like, oh, okay. And so, and because there's nothing else that ever seemed to come of these things, you just start to be like, I didn't really see what I thought I saw. It must have been something else.
Right. And have you had any other sightings, Brandon, while you've been on base at all?
Yeah, for me, I haven't. That was the only sighting on base, or that was actually my only sighting. But I was part of the night that the call for the Vandenberg Square came in. I was on patrol, so I was at Vandenberg from 2001 to 2007, and during that time, or at least at the time of the incident, I was a patrolman, and so we had different zones on base that we would have to kind of look after, whether it's base housing or it was up into like the LFs and patrolling the coastline. And so just as a kind of a response to if anything were to happen. In Vandenberg, there's lots of things that, like, you get protesters or you get people trying to get on base sometimes. And so they kind of had to spread out. That night I was on main base. And so I actually remember being with the other Brandon, and we're sitting at the desk and kind of, with these late at night, again, we worked mids. So I think we were on from 6 to 6 is our normal kind of time we're on shift. So about midnight kind of things, we'd kind of go back to the desk and just check in and see how everything was going. If there's anything else that we needed to do. And at that time, that's when the call came in, right about, between like midnight and 1. And honestly, I think from my remembrance of what happened was that there was, again, it was like this disbelief, like, are we really hearing what we think we're hearing? That we got people that we know, that we've worked with for years, in panic mode, calling in this light coming over the ocean, and just this, like, what is going on? But again, I think one of those things is being in the military, you wouldn't really joke about something on that level. It'd be like one thing if somebody came up to your post and be like, oh yeah, this happened. But to call in over the radio and things like that, and be reporting it through that. That's an official means. It's an official channel, and it should be reported, at least in the blotter, and official documentation's happening. And so again, we're hearing this report come in, and it gets more panicked. And that's when Jeff took off to go down there to kind of take a look and talk to the people that were posted down there. The rest of us had to stay because it was primarily, that was our zone to be on main base. But again, at that point, then, we're all kind of going out, looking in the sky, like, hey, heading as close to the coast as we can in our zones to see, like, hey, are we seeing anything? Is there anything that is kind of still flying over, anything like that?
That's interesting. Can you just give us a quick description of how it was described to you? Obviously, you say it was this red object, but just so that I've got it on record, how you.
Yeah, the call I remember hearing come in was that it was this red glowing object, and it had approached from the ocean, because the way that site is, it actually sits, I would say, within 100 yards or 200 yards of the ocean. It's fairly close, and they said it was coming over the ocean directly at the space launch complex, and then it stopped and it paused over. But again, all we're getting on the radio at the time is that it's this red glowing object over and over, and that they don't know what it is, that they're kind of you could hear they were freaked out, they were very scared at what they were seeing, and that it had taken off rather quickly as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's move on to, I'm going to bring Brandon in here, because I think, Brandon, could you just tell us about your experience? First of all, your position and duties at Vandenberg.
Sure. So I was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base between 2000 and 2004. My duties, I was security forces. I was law enforcement side. I patrolled, and then ultimately went to the desk, the dispatcher, desk sergeant. That was my position the night of this incident that occurred.
Oh, thank you so much. And then, so could you give us a description of what you were doing on the night, what you heard, who you spoke to, and just kind of lay it out for us?
Yeah, sure. So Brandon pretty much summed it up. So he happened to be at the desk at the time that this happened, as he said. So he came in, and then when this call came in, we were all kind of like, wait, what's going on here? So my position and my duties was basically to oversee a lot of what was going on and forward all this information up. I was also responsible for the official blotters and all this that happened on any call that came in. So when this came in, I was like, what do we have going on? First and foremost, we have to get eyes on this guy. We have to get people to the area. We have to start dispatching initial personnel to that area. So when I initially got the call and we heard the tone of the voice, I'm like, something's going on, something serious. There was, I believe, 2 internal SARTs, 2 external SARTs, and then there was like an entry control point. So there was 5 people already at this complex. We had additional patrols that were, security, that were different sites and stuff that we were able to dispatch to that location. So that was my initial thought, was start getting people going to that area. Jeff, being the supervisor of law enforcement side, him and I were in contact. He was like, I'm on my way, I'm going. So I maintained contact with the people that are on site, just advise them, maintain vigilance, let me know where it's at. If it's actually coming to the restricted area, if it's over the restricted area. And as this progressed, they said, this is what it looks like, as Brandon explained before. It's a big red object. There's no sound. It was coming towards the restricted area, and they flat out didn't know what to do. As neither did I, we're just going based off of training and saying, hey, we're going to send everybody over there and deal with what we have. And if there's a threat, there's a threat, and we handle it from there. So this happened. I don't even know how long. It's been a long time. But I don't know, maybe 50 seconds, 30 seconds, somewhere in there. It felt it took a long time. And then they said it just took off, up over the mountains, and it was gone. So again, that restricted area is right on the ocean. And there's mountains along the coastline of California. So we all kind of came back, got together. We had a debrief about what we all seen. And on my end of things, I had the official reporting responsibilities. So I remember our flight sergeant walking in, our flight chief at the time, and I said, hey, what am I doing with this? Because back in 2000, 2002, 2003, this kind of was like, to me anyways, was hush hush. I'm like, am I putting this in the blotter? And he says yes. And I said, okay, just to verify that we're actually going to put this incident on an official document. So I typed that all up, and off that went. And then I ended up making my notifications up the chain to everybody that needed to know that we had an incident that involved a restricted area, which is a big deal. And we ended up getting off of our shift, and then the powers to be above us did what they did with that information. And that's what I had to do with that day.
Oh, thank you. And do you know, or did you speak to any of the witnesses that were on that by that restricted area that saw the object? Did you have further conversations?
As Brandon said, our flight, and everybody we worked with, and again, all of us here, we all worked together. We were all dear friends. We had a very, very tight group of people. We hung out with each other all the time. We deployed with each other. So we talked about this numerous times over, the following weeks and months. And it's funny because when this all came up, Jeff reached out to us and he's like, hey, anybody remember this? And I go, yeah, I do remember this because I literally just told a story, and it was probably 2 weeks prior to him actually reaching out to us about, hey, I was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and we had a big incident out there, because it was all starting to come to light, and different people are coming out and speaking about it. So, but yeah, we did. We discussed it. We talked about it. There was several people that observed it, that were on that site, that were en route to that site. And there was also, I believe, prior to our shift coming on, there was another incident that transpired prior to that Jeff was actually briefed about. Mm-hmm. So when he was in, he'll fill you in on that, but he was already alerted to the fact that there was something going on, whether he believed it, whether he didn't believe it. But when you're also being, told this information from the previous shift, I mean, it tends to be probably true, So he took that he took it with a grain of salt, maybe not. However, we had our incident that occurred, and then we're like, holy cow, it's happening, So what do we do? And and then we rolled with it. So yeah, we talked about this for the course of my career for sure. We all were together for a long time, and we're all dear friends, and this is kind of cool that we're doing this.
Yeah.
So Jeff, obviously you've been on the show before to talk about this, but if you want to add anything to that, if you want to kind of bring up anything about, again, what you've experienced, even if we've heard it before, I'd like to hear it again.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I could start with briefly the Vandenberg Square event. Yeah, I had come in to shift. I'd come in early to do changeover the day of this event, and I had been briefed on the Red Square incident that had occurred at LF 10 in 23 earlier that morning. So I had already gotten the full story from the daytime encounter with the Boeing contractors and the gigantic Red Square. And then we all came on duty that evening. I'm pretty sure that our flight chief briefed that prior incident in our guard mount. When we begin shift, they give you a briefing on all the incidents that happened previously. So we were all aware that we had that encounter earlier that day. And then, that night, I know we were all of us were talking about that incident and excited about it. And I'm sure Brandon was out looking at the sky, and Grant was out looking at the sky. And we were all out, doing that. And then the way I remember it, I had been out on the coast with my NVGs and stuff, looking around, and then I got kind of spooked being out there alone, and I came back to the dispatch center, and I was hanging out with both Brandons on the desk when it happened. And then that radio transmission came in where they reported the strange light moving erratically, and then like Brandon said, very quickly things got out of hand, and the frantic, panicked calls came in with them describing this object coming right up to the entry control point and then flying off. And then I just remember looking at everybody, looking at Brandon, and saying, I'm heading out there, I'm gonna go. And I remember all the radio chatter, and Brandon was providing command and control, dispatching people, telling people what actions to take. And then when I got out there, I talked to everybody that was on scene. I am pretty sure that I had them take written sworn statements, and I would have brought those back to Brandon and turned them in. But they all had seen the same thing. Everybody at Slick 4 that evening on Bravo flight, they were together at the entry control point when the incident occurred. So they were all standing next to each other, and they observed it come in, stop, hover silently at the entry control point, and then dart off. So I remember pretty clearly all of that happening. And yeah, I just remember being in complete shock and awe and excited and confused.
Yeah.
And then that kind of leads into Grant's story. Over the next few days, strange things kept occurring on the base, you know.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, let's move on to you, Grant. Let's, if you could just quickly again give your position and duties at Vandenberg. Thank you.
I was there from I think 2001 to 2008 is when I was there, and it was already my fourth base. I was security forces. When I got there, I was a staff sergeant, I believe. No, I was a senior airman when I got there. Later, when all this happened, I was a staff sergeant. Security forces, I was there as a patrolman, law enforcement patrolman, as well as desk sergeant, and then later on game warden there as well. So that's a whole different stories on that side.
Yeah.
But the thing about all this is the stories they're talking about, the square and all that. I don't know if it's the same, because I was kind of a floater for a while on different flights, because I was a desk sergeant and we were short on desk sergeant. So they had me going from like flight to flight and then stuff like that. So the one incident I do remember well that I did talk to Nusatelli about, and I remember well, is and I don't know if it's the same one or not, but it is when Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department was calling into the desk saying, hey, our desks, our 911 dispatch has crashed. Like, you crashed our 911 dispatch, and there's something flying over your base. Can you confirm, or blah, 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 blah. And I remember being on the desk, but I don't think I was working the desk. I think I was just up there watching Adult Swim or something. And then I remember a bunch of people going out to go look outside and everything. And that's when everybody started talking about it. For some reason, I might have been on the desk because I didn't leave. And then I remember I did a blotter entry into it. I mean, I made a detailed blotter entry, so I do remember that. So I had it, and I'm pretty sure it's the same incident, because weird things happen out there all the time. I mean, all the time. So it was, you didn't really like just talk about it, because it was just like work stuff. So when we were off. So
yeah,
we didn't like sit around and talk about it. And plus we were all like Brandon and everybody said we're real close. We were real close. I'm still haven't been as close. I still don't have friends as close as I am with these guys as I was with those guys when we were all together. We were tight, and we talked about everything. And it wasn't that you're being judged, we're afraid to talk about it. It was just everybody noticed it and seen it. There's nothing really to talk about. I mean, you can't go up with it, because they're going to be like, okay, pat you on the head and go on about your way. And you're going to feel like, well, now I'm an idiot, you know? So, and we got those calls a lot up on the desk when I was there. And I got a lot of calls when I was later on as a game warden out there for strange stuff that happened. I never saw it as a game warden. I would respond, but I never actually like put eyes on anything. And then back to the story of when the weird thing out on the flight line, I was about to deploy. So I know it was like 2 weeks before Halloween, because I deployed on Halloween to Iraq. I remember that. And it was just 2 weeks before that. So I think it was like the middle of October. I was, for some reason, I don't know what, I remember being pissed off because I had to sit, and I was a staff sergeant, but I had to sit on the north side of the runway for some reason, the base. I don't know what we were doing. I just remember being pissed off and cold. And lights, like, they didn't like approach like normal aircraft. They were just there on the flight line, and they were on our flight line. It landed on our flight line. I watched it land on our flight line, and it was, I take it was facing me because all I could see was lights, and it had zero sound to it, zero whatsoever sound. And I know the flight line was closed because at that night, I mean, everybody knows the flight line's closed out there after we don't have aircraft. And then the second thing, except for helicopters, and the second thing was the tower was out because it was dark out there. There was no lights. Runway lights weren't on. None of the lights they would turn on if there's approach of aircraft. And it landed. It came down. I don't know if it landed, but it came down. It was low. And then as fast as it was there, it was gone. And then we were sitting over there. I was with a group of guys, and we were all kind of talking about, like, man, I don't know, are we like losing our minds, man? What's going on? And then that's when someone from the base, it was a colonel, I remember that, and he was like, hey, did you guys see anything out here? And this was like several hours later, asking us about it. And we're like, yeah, we told him what happened. That was the end of it. And then OSI came and talked about it. Oh, it was like a couple days later or something. Because I remember Sergeant Owensby said, "What'd you do now, man? OSBI's looking for you." And if you don't know what not OSBI, I'm sorry, what are they called? The
Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
Yeah, the Air Force Special. Yeah, those guys came and spoke to us, and like I said, I mean, that's all I saw was lights. It disappeared. No sound, no nothing. That was it.
And when you say disappeared, did it fly off, disappeared, or blink out?
Yeah, like it was gone. Like, I mean, just gone. The lights were there. We were looking at them, and it was gone. Like, they turned out the lights, but you'd be able to see it because it was big. It wasn't small. Whatever it was pretty big.
That's strange, really strange. So just kind of coming back to everyone, did anybody hear of anybody saying, well, it must have been helicopters, it must have been this or that? Were there any theories being bandied about for any of the sightings?
I'll go on this. So from being a desk sergeant, like, myself and Grant were, anything that's going on around that base is supposed to be called into us. And we're supposed to have notes about what flights are coming in. Because like Grant said, we didn't have planes. And if we had somebody who was landing on those flight lines, we had to have people out there. So that was a staffing issue for Jeff. Jeff would have to dispatch law enforcement people out to that to flight line. And we would be, obviously there would be different people that that were supposed to be somewhere else and now have to go to the flight line. So again, we had that information that was on the desk. It would be transferred from one desk sergeant to the next desk sergeant for what shift. So we had a pretty good idea of what was going on at that base. And if we didn't know about it, it became an incident and it became an issue and it became a blotter entry, So, and we were asked previous to this too, we had a weather station on base, and it would have been above our heads, so when we initially had this information and we typed it up and then they went in the blotter and it went wherever it went and people did whatever they did with it, that was probably a good place to go to see whether or not, the weather station was marking anything on the radars. So we had capabilities, we had different things going on that could probably figure out what it was or what it wasn't. But as Grant was saying, we used to get calls all the time from, the sheriff's department, California Highway Patrol. They would call us a lot on the desk. Him and I would know that obviously because we worked the desk quite a bit. And they would ask us a lot of questions on a secure line about what do you guys have going on up there? And I'm like, good question. We don't know. So as far as that goes, we would have had that information that was going on. Planes flying by, planes landing. We needed to know that information. We're the ones that were going to deal with that.
Right. And what sort of aircraft were stationed there? Were you always aware of what was there then? What specific models of, whether it's F-18s or I don't know, whatever it may be?
Yeah, we were all trained on our aircraft. That was part of our career field. We had to identify aircraft and know what aircraft are. So, I mean, and like I said earlier, the only thing that was common there was you might have like a few like F-15s coming in and out. The Navy base might have a few they'll drop in and maybe do like a touch and go, or they might land and refuel, but that's it. I mean, that's the only aircraft were bypassers traveling through.
Yeah.
Other than that, we had the 76 helicopter test
Well, yeah.
or helicopter squadron.
And those guys, and like the helicopter, they used a lot of those for like search and rescue and stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, because I mean, the whole thing with Vandenberg is that like we didn't have planes on any kind of regular basis. I think the only planes I saw primarily were when we had to deploy. Planes in to deploy, and so it was primarily the space launch complexes, and then the missile defense system is what was there. But I think that's what brings up the interesting history of that base, and just like what it was originally supposed to be, and the intent was to launch space shuttles off of the West Coast. And then they did a space shuttle launch, and then after that, they realized that the ground erosion was sinking too much. They would not be able to do this over time. So we had one of the longest flight lines in the Air Force. Yeah. I understand. I mean, our flight line was 5 miles long. It was huge, but it was not used. So huge. I mean, out there to do PT or something like that. Be like, all right, we're doing the flight line PT this month and stuff like that. But yeah, and the other thing too, I think is interesting as well is that correct me if I'm wrong, but Vandenberg at that time was the headquarters for Space Command prior to going to Space Force. I believe so, right? Correct, Jeff?
No, it wasn't. No. It wasn't headquarters.
Okay, it was Colorado.
Okay,
yeah. So I am incorrect on that. But I mean, ultimately, it was a huge base, 43 miles of coastline, and a lot of it was undeveloped. And so,
that's great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just like for all of the sightings and stories that were about mysterious objects or lights, having this helicopter wing, do you think it would have been very easy for any of the witnesses, and this is just your opinion, to have known the difference between what they were seeing and a helicopter due to noise, positioning of lights? Let's say they would recognize that's a certain type of helicopter. So, would you think that there's a possibility that anyone could have been mistaken for seeing helicopters?
These were Vietnam era.
Huge.
So they were loud. You could hear them for miles and miles.
Right.
And you hear them so often out there. You could tell if they were over the ocean, over land. You could tell the difference in the sound there.
Yeah, that's really good.
They would also do backup support as well for the police and the cops and the security forces out there. So if there were several instances where we would have like a protest coming up, and it was going to be a big one, in that they would be out flying around as we were also canvassing the ground as well. So I mean, they were out enough that, like Rand said, like people would know. It wasn't some secret they have a helicopter squadron, but nobody knows about it. It was pretty. They were out quite a bit.
And then, I was going to say, were there any other instances of any other kinds of incursions over the base that were identified as something prosaic, let's say, or were these instances the only real ones that happened and you just didn't know what they were?
We did have incursions from the sea. From protesters. They would get Zodiac boats. They would try to infiltrate the base. And we did have while I was there from 1999 until 2006. We had a couple of unannounced aircraft arrivals. That's typically if a pilot gets lost or has an emergency and needs to find an alternate landing. We had a couple of those. But with Grant's case, I do remember basically correct me if I'm wrong, Grant, but what him and the guys he was with observed was basically the same thing. They see a strange light over the ocean. It approaches the base. It drops in altitude. They can't make out what it is. It's just this strange light. And then it literally approaches the flight line, comes down below the tree line. So you're talking below 30 feet.
Right.
And then that light goes out. And I remember it was a very big deal because it was an unannounced aircraft arrival. That's how it was logged. And that's one of the most serious security incidents you can have. You can't have unknowns landing on your base, right? So I think for that reason is why Grant was debriefed by whoever that colonel was, because this was serious business, and then by OSI later.
But there should be nothing. I mean, we all know nothing should get into that base undetected because, well, that's the whole base's mission. That's the function of the base, is to make sure nothing approaches from the north, west, and south there. So, I mean, and then I remember someone calling the air traffic controllers on one siding at one time, and they played dumb. And I don't know if they were playing dumb because that's what they were told to say, but I don't think they were high enough rank, and I don't think they had any reason to lie. I mean, but I remember them saying, I wasn't on the call, but I remember the call, and they all said that they didn't know what it was. They don't know what they saw.
It's an unknown.
Yeah, it was just unknown, but that happens so much, and you don't really have a reporting agency to go to for that stuff. I mean, that's just. I mean, you kind of feel like you're in the military. That's your job. You're going to see weird stuff, and that's your job to say hush about it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of how we felt back then, for sure.
Yeah, especially at that base.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you had Boeing contractors and maybe even other contractors as well. Is there any possibility that they could be testing something without the whole base knowing about it?
Oh,
Would that be
interesting you say that, because Boeing is one of the people that called that first incident in, I believe. Correct, Jeff?
You're right. Yeah.
There we go. Interesting.
They launched big things out of there. So like payloads for like satellites and stuff. So, I mean, there's all kinds of countries, I'm sure, linked to it too.
Yeah. But I think the main thing too, to keep in mind, I mean, if Boeing was going to start testing random stuff without notifying the military, that becomes a huge security issue in and of itself. Because if the reaction was that we're going to launch munitions or do something in kind of a reactive way, now you have the defense contractor coming back and saying that they were the ones in charge of it. And so, I mean, that doesn't really make sense with what their mission was as well, was just to get things into the sky, get things in order.
Yeah. And the other thing, because that question comes up a lot, do you think, some agency was testing tech? And you have to remember that we were heavily armed, right? The Air Force security forces are heavily armed, and depending on where you are in the world, they might have Stinger missiles and 50 caliber machine guns. We have grenade launchers. We have grenade machine gun launchers. 40 caliber machine guns. So there would always be a potential, if you're testing tech over the base and the cops engage and start to fire at this thing, you're going to have some kind of disaster, right? So I think it's just highly unlikely that this was some kind of special access program or something like that, because these events happen in broad daylight and they're happening at night. They're buzzing, the police who are heavily armed and contractors, and it's happening regularly. So,
and not just with the military base right there, we had a nuclear plant right there too.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Was that separate from the base but close by?
Yeah.
Very close. Yeah. Wasn't it in San Luis Obispo or Pismo or something?
It was somewhere in that area, because we worked with some reservists that worked at I can't remember their name, but they worked at the nuke plant.
Because they all said how good of a job it was, and they pay well.
Yeah.
And is that nuke plant on the beach, or right by the ocean?
It'd be by the ocean, yeah.
That's funny, because that just jogged a memory. I was in San Luis Obispo in 1995, and I remember seeing this huge, what would have been a power plant of some sort on the beach. That's crazy that I've potentially seen it. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you were in that area when Brandon and Phoenix and I had our encounter. Yeah.
No, it was 95. Sorry.
Oh, 95. Sorry.
Yeah, I thought I said 05. I thinking back, it was 95. So it was a long time ago. Yeah. That's crazy. But listen, guys, before we end, is there anything else that anyone you want to say or anything like that? I don't want to miss anything. We're all happy.
I can't do anything. Yeah.
I just appreciate the ability to have the conversation be more open. I think that is something that I know Jeff and I have talked about for years. Is just like, again, are we going crazy? Are we remembering things that actually happened? Is our memory and just our understanding of what was happening, has that been kind of shifted through time? And so the ability, I think, to take a serious look at this. And I know for us, having that group of friends was easy to not feel crazy. I could not imagine what it would feel like if you were out on patrol by yourself and you didn't have that support system, and then trying to process this stuff where you might not have felt like you could have talked. And I know that there's probably quite a few military members out there as well that have had that happen. So I think, again, just the ability for it to be taken seriously to something that can come forward. I know I appreciate that. So thank you for that.
Oh, no, I appreciate it too. And, you know, I think the subjects, the whole of UFOs, UAP, unidentified objects, has gone mainstream in recent years. And, you know, there isn't so much stigma and taboo surrounding it. And, you know, it's always good to hear from witnesses. But then you have credible military trained observers such as you guys coming forward. It adds that credibility to it. And it's not about saying, look, these guys have seen aliens. That's nowhere near what we're trying to talk about. We're trying to talk about the fact that these incursions have been happening over military installations and, you know, naval fleets for quite a few decades, and these individuals were a part of that, or who saw things. And so that's, for me personally, is why I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with you, gents. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One strange detail I'd like to add,
Sure.
Brandon, you could jump in on this too with our encounter. So before we saw that light appear, before Phoenix saw it, we were sitting around the fire talking about the previous UFO encounters. We were having this like deep discussion, the three of us. And then Phoenix kept, you know, turning around. And then finally I looked up and she's like, you know, I was like, what is that? Because what we saw was anomalous, right? And I remember us having the conversation like, is that a satellite? You think it's a satellite? And it was not moving like a satellite, because from my recollection, it was maneuvering like gently. And then as it came, it appeared over the ocean, got closer, and then it dropped in elevation. And when it was over my house, when Phoenix and I talked a while back, she estimated it was about 30 feet in diameter and about 250 feet off the ground. So it was right over us. Yeah. I had estimated it a little bit larger and a little bit higher. I thought it was like about 500 feet. But that was the weird thing that I couldn't get through my head. Like, what's the odds of a coincidence like that, right? We're having this deep, long conversation about all these events that happened to Grant, that you know, Brandon saw, and all these other events that we're privy to, and then suddenly it's like, well, here you go, hello, right?
Yeah,
Brandon, you want to jump in on that? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think. My remembrance was 300 to 500 feet above. But yeah, I think, you know, and again, like I said, Vandenberg is a very interesting base anyway, because there were lots of other just like weird coincidences that would happen. There'd be things that, you know, don't do this or don't go over here because you might not know what you're going to find type thing. It was, and again, there were some things that were almost like these open secrets. You didn't go out announcing them or talking about them, but during shift change, you'd be like, hey, this happened. You just be like, really? Like, okay. And there's lots of mythology to the base as well.
Like the Underground Railroads and
Because
moving nukes under the ground, under the base. And then, man, there was a lot of dark history too. Patton lived there too. I mean, and there's a lot of dark history with the Japanese camps that they had. Yeah. And then they're still, when I was a game warden, we went up to them all the time. We used them as observation posts, but they had the turrets from back in the war when they were going to protect the West Coast.
Yeah. That you have the Spanish missions are prevalent through Southern California. So there was talk of like, you know, maybe burial grounds. There is a huge mythology, I think, around Vandenberg. 2 years, I think it was in 99, they had a huge fire that.
Oh yeah, the Harris grade fire. I was in the middle of that one.
I mean, there's you add these things, then the protests, Martin Sheen getting arrested at the base, bringing more light to that.
He was really nice though. He was very courteous. He was great, very friendly.
And like Grant's saying, we would go out, we would just drive, because when you had these patrol zones, they were huge, and so you didn't really have much else to do. So we'd go drive, and then you'd be on this dirt road, and then suddenly railroad tracks out of nowhere, bunkers out of nowhere, and it was just a very interesting place to be, and just lots of possibility, I think, there. But again, because of that, you don't want to speculate too much on all this stuff. But it led to lots of interesting conversations and debate amongst ourselves about like, oh, well, what could that be?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
Reagan came out there for the honor of the Reagan space program. Did you guys work that when Nancy Reagan came out?
No, I don't remember that.
Why do I always get stuck doing that crap? You guys seem to always get out of that stuff. I was always getting stuck with crap like that.
You're probably deployed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's probably when you were gone when you guys were flying back home and 9/11 happened. Or not 9/11. Yeah, 9/11 happened. Yeah.
9/11.
Wow. Well, gentlemen, listen, thank you so much for your insights, for your testimony, for your stories. It really means a lot. I really, really do appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.